Righty. So I hope you spent a little time there. I actually did as well, right? JSON object notation used for local storage. And the reason we're having to convert it into and I actually didn't say that probably completely correct. You don't have to use JSON, but we're going to because of what we want to store, right? And that's really probably the more correct way I should have said it. So let's actually do it. Okay. So in this case, we still, right, we still have the, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this, what is already in there, right? But this time, we're not going to, we're going to do an extra command to actually, what we call stringify, okay, turn it from an object literal into a string version of that. So we're going to say set item, right? Let's call it trip data, right? And here's the new command, JSON dot stringify. Now we have to tell it what we want to stringify. Okay. So now that we have that, we have to end it. Okay. So that's the command that we want when we have data in our app that we want to save to make it persistent. So let's just go ahead and do that. And now if you come up here, you can see it. Okay, cool. All right. And again, if we were to refresh, it still exists over here, but of course in our app it doesn't. Okay. So now how could we bring it back? Right? So then we could do the other one. Other way we do it is local storage dot get item. Okay. But in this case, we're going to get item, and actually let's store it in a variable because we're going to need to do something to it. So let's say uh, we're not going to call it my data because that's, although we could, right? Let's just call it data for a minute, equal to, right? Local storage dot get item trip data. Okay, so if we did data, oh, we see it in this stringified format. So what we want to do is data dot JSON, right? No, actually, in this case, we start with JSON dot parse. We tell it what we want to parse, which is that data, okay, that we return from get. So now we have it in the form we're used to, right? So now I can do, actually I can't, right? Because it's in an array of objects. So I'd have to do, and then dot miles, right? Sure here. Oh, duh, when I did it, right? When I did this, when I ran JSON.parse, I have to store it in a new variable. So I'd say const new data. Good. And then new data. Now it's in the form we're used to. Okay, so that's the process. And now we're actually going to write this code in our JavaScript file, but I just wanted to give you an understanding of, right, before we save it into local storage, what do we need to do, right? We need to stringify it. Was that still up here somewhere? Where I stringified it, it might have went away. And then when I wanna go get it, right, get the item, then I have to parse it in order for me to use it. So it's just a conversion process before I save it, and then after I get back. Okay, so let's think about where we're going to do it in our code now, because we know that it's stored here, right? So in a sense, we could say right here, right? Now, can we assume we have, when the page loads, right, at this point, we can't assume there's anything in local storage, so we want to check. So why don't we write a function, actually, sorry, why don't we call a function here that's called get trip data, okay? So let's call a function get trip data. That doesn't really, at this point, let's just put it above it. Actually, it makes sense where it is because this, right, when we're calling this. So what do we want? We want a function, right? Get trip data because my data is going to be global. We don't have to pass it, which by the way, we could, but we don't want to in this case, right? I'm going to set a constant. I'm going to say trip data JSON equal, okay, local storage, which we've seen, dot get item, right? Trip data. That's getting it. So could we just say return it? No, we need to do one more step, right? We could say return, right? JSON.parse trip. Sorry. Oh, that's all right. I had it right there. It is the right one. Remember, because once we bring it back, once we get it back, then we have to parse it. And that's what would become our data. Okay. And we've called it here on the global. So let's see, because I know I still have it here, right? And look at this. Let's see, is my data, did it populate my, oh, it drives me crazy sometimes. Of course, it's really me. I'm the problem. So if I said my data, right? There's nothing in there. Called it, I've passed it. So let's walk through it. Okay. So let's refresh this, right? I just want to say it one more time in case. Oh, this is the old version. Just doesn't have the updated version. Because in this case, we should have the function call. Am I on the, let me make sure I'm on the right one. That's funny. I bet you've had that happen before. I was actually working off of the wrong main file. So when I wrote that, it wasn't running the code. So now I can see that it is actually running the right code. So I'll set it a breakpoint here. There's my function. So when I run it, get data, okay, because we know that that is persistent in there, and meaning it's stored in there. So then we can say return. So now it's going to return it. That's cool, right? So now we have it. We know that we now have the return data. But what are we missing here, right? We have it, but what? Now at least the one in RAM is gone, but now we know we still have it here. How do we then get it rendered into the page? I want you to think about that for a minute. Is there code we have to render this? And the answer is, yeah, there is. What is that, right? Render table. So, but this render table is called here in the event listener, so it only gets triggered, remember, because it's asynchronous here. So all we'd really have to do here is we could just call render table here out on the global space. Go ahead and do that. And then we now have, voila, persistent data. Okay. Cool, right? So let's think about it though, right? So let's think about what would happen though. What would happen if when we start out, because this is what's going to happen, is there's going to be nothing in here, right? Because look at what happens when there's nothing in here and we run this code. Let's just watch it because it's actually erroring out, right, on the length. Why would that be? Because it's like, hey, my data length can't be a thing here when you try to render the table when there's no data. right? That's because it only gets returned based on the code that we wrote. It assumes there's data, so we can't assume. So what we want to write is some logic, something like maybe if trip data JSON, right? Not equal to, because when it tries to get it, and if there's nothing there, not equal to null. Then what do we want to do? If it's not equal, that means there's something in there. So then we can do that. Then we can return it. Okay. Else, okay, else what? Okay, so if trip the returned value from get item, right? If it's not equal to null, then yeah, we're going to parse it. But what's going to happen if it is null? Then all we want to do is return an empty array, not an empty object, an empty array, because that's how my data was originally set up on the global namespace, the global right here. Remember, before we were calling this was just an array. So now we have to have some logic that looks out into local storage and looks to see if the item is there. Okay, if it is there, then parse it and return it. If it's not there, return an empty string, and that's what allows us to handle that page load condition. Let's go ahead and let that run. Let's run a couple times because I've changed the code. Okay, I've got it stopped right here, so we'll just let it run through. Oh, did I clear it? Oh, I did. I clear it. I was like, why isn't anything there? Because I accidentally, not accidentally. So let's go here, enter some data. Good, it's there. Sweet, right? We refresh the page. Do I have a stopgap somewhere on here? So when it renders the table, let's walk through it and see what I missed. Do we have the data? Oh yeah, what's wrong here? Let's look at it, right? So in this case, is there data out there? No, because all this code is doing is getting it. So we need another one to actually do what? We need another function. I mean, we could just write code directly, but we need another one to actually save it. Okay, because all this does, right, is gets the item if it exists, because we wrote the code earlier to do that. Okay, so now the way we save it, okay, where would we want to save it? Okay, so we've fixed one thing, but now we have another situation to think about, because all we're doing is getting it, right? So if we do this, right, here, right, we know we have it. It's not in local storage because our code so far only gets what's already there. So what do you remember what we had to do to save it? Let's see if I still have it so I don't have to rewrite it, the whole thing. Okay. Local storage set item. Okay, we'll call it trip data. And in my data, I already know I have something in my data. It's setting right here, right? So all we need is that line. Now when we do that, okay, we refresh. Good, now it brings it back. So the question is, and I want you to see, this is going to be your coding challenge. So you're going to attempt to say, you know, the code you need to write, right? We know the code you need to write. We know the line. The question is, where do you put it? All right, so at this point, we have some code. I have a coding challenge. So what I want you to do is attempt the coding challenge and then do a commit that says I'll give you a commit message here in a minute for what this is like. But let's understand what's happening. As we know we need to do this, where do we need to do this? Where do we need to save the data? Okay, all right, give that a shot.